Prediction. So predicting, we want to make educated guesses in the absence of clues. And we're not so fortunate that we always have clues that there's birds or pilots or even clouds, especially out here. Most of in summer cross-country flying that we do, usually there are no clouds. And so there's still thermals, it's just blue sky thermals. So in these instances where we don't have any clues, we want to make, we need to predict it. We need to make educated guesses and fly over these points where we expect thermals to be, and hopefully we do find them. How do we do this? So if we go back to the initial starting point of how a thermal is formed, it is with sunshine, the sun shining on the ground. And that's an important thing to bear in mind. If it's early in the morning, an easterly facing slope, and if you think about it, a surface that is perpendicular to the sun's rays is going to get heated up the most. And if it's sloped, it will heat up less. So in the morning, steep surfaces that are east facing are going to be more perpendicular to the sun, and therefore they will heat up nicely and can be a good source of thermals. And so you have an eastern facing slope, and it will warm up nicely, slide up to the top of that that ridge or mountain, whatever it is, and because it cannot slide any further, it will trigger from that point. Conversely, if it's now later in the afternoon, it's the western facing slopes. In South Africa, there's also a difference between a north and a south facing slope. Anybody want to take a guess as to which slope is better in terms of a source for a thermal? Richard?
North.
Yep, north facing, because we are in the southern hemisphere, and therefore the south facing slopes get they're not directly in sun. So if it was a building, the south facing wall will be much cooler than the north facing one. So you want to take into account the direction of the slope, the time of the day, the surface type, the sources that we were talking about earlier. You also need to account for the wind direction. Why? Because you may have a source, and this source will that's warming up the air, but it's going to slide downwind or upslope. And the wind, understanding the wind direction will help you predict where to go and look for the thermal. We are, like I said, we identify the sources and identify the triggers. So
Ria, what about how do you determine your wind direction up in the air if you don't know, if you're not sure?
So we just spoke about that, and your answers was looking at dams, looking at the surfaces of water bodies, looking at,
and even higher up in the sky. Are there any like sort of tricks you can do to determine your wind direction at whatever altitude you're at?
Okay, so firstly, before we even get into the sky, there's the weather forecasting. So that will give you an expectation as to what's happening lower down. And if you're so high up that you can't see these changes in wind direction at the bottom, well, then you must go with what's going on with you and just assume that it's the same direction going down to the bottom. This is an absence of any knowledge of that the wind is at the bottom, including the forecast. And then to know what your wind direction is you just note your ground speed. If you are going, you can do a circle and just looking at the ground below you. When you are there's going to be one direction where your speed will be the fastest, and on the other side of that circle it will be the slowest, and that's giving you wind direction.
Okay, perfect, cool, thanks.
Cool. So looking at the picture that we have up on the screen, this is the Porterville. which is about an hour and a half drive north of Cape Town. It's probably the country's premier cross-country site, and there's hundreds of pilots, foreign pilots coming and flying out here. We have there's two competitions a year in South Africa. We have Barberton in winter and Porterville in summer. And Porterville's a real haven for cross-country flying. And there's good reasons for it. You can see firstly that we've got this mountain range, this ridge that's running north-south. And if you think about it, the sun gets up above the mountains and you've got this big western slope heating up all the way down to sunset. And if you look out to the left of the slope, there's lots of big fields, and they provide, number one, great sources for thermals, and number two, really easy landing areas. So this Porterville Valley pretty much is, the entire thing is a landing field except for one farm which we're not allowed to land on. And now just continuing with the picture, is you want to identify what could be the possible triggers here. So if I look out in terms of sources, we've got those wonderful dried fields on the left-hand side. And then what could be the triggers? Well, let's think about the wind direction, and let's assume we have a southwester wind direction. So this could be a trigger, and source coming from that side. Here's a nice tree line, so that could be a trigger with a farmhouse in front of it, also adding to the source. And if I were to find a thermal, depending on the wind strength, it will be somewhere around here, depending on how you are, of course. But you want to identify this. So if you were flying and you couldn't see anything, there's no birds, you now need to start making educated guesses. There's other tree lines. There's a little dam over here with a few trees behind it. There's foothills. These foothills also can be great triggers. So the thermal slides along, whether it's coming from this dam or these fields, and it pushes through. Then it goes up the foothills, and because these foothills have their own little peaks and tops, that can cause the thermal to release from that point and go up. The mountain itself is a great trigger. So the thermal sliding up the slopes, getting up to the top over here and going up. Now, the cool thing about this is that even whether you've been to Porterville or not, or wherever it is that you are going flying, you can do this kind of research before you go and fly. And you can, Google Maps is free. You open up the satellite view on where you intend flying and look at it. And this will help you have some sort of game plan when you go out there flying, that, here's some possible triggers, or I can look for clues out here. For example, a wind farm that has these turbines, and if they're turning in different directions, it's likely because there's a thermal that's going off and pulling the wind in from different directions. And knowing that that is there will help you with your route planning, or what to expect as you're heading down the route, instead of blindly going. We want to fly, well, we each all have our own goals, and to each his own, but if you want to be going, flying or maximizing on your time or distance, the more knowledge that you have, the better decisions you can make. There's also, in terms of using tools like Google Maps and Google Earth, when you are out flying yourself, if you are recording your track log, and I would recommend that you do this, there's free apps out there for iOS and Android, and you can use them to record it. Even if you don't want to fly with an instrument, you can press record, put it inside your pocket, or put it inside your bag in the back, let it record in the background. And when you go home, or the next day, whatever it is, you download that track log, open it up in Google Earth, and have a look. Especially in the beginning, and whenever you can be flying and you just fly into a thermal, it's going up and you turn and you climb. But by now doing this track log analysis, you can look back and ask yourself, oh, you know what, the wind was in this direction. What was the source? What was the trigger? Where did it come from? If you didn't ask yourself that question whilst flying. And by doing this, you are arming yourself with more knowledge, and the next time you go and fly out there, you know, oh look, there's this trigger over here, this place worked well in this direction, and it helps you with your predictions, it helps you with your flying speed, whatever it is. So more knowledge is definitely more power. um where was I? It is ideal, if you listen to tips about finding thermals, that you want to identify 3 points at where these three triggers, or a source that could be a trigger itself, for example, a farmhouse. Um, three of them on your route, on your move that you're making now, wherever you're going, as places that you will look for a thermal, because perhaps you've gotten up, takeoff, and used the house thermal and gotten to 1,000 meters, 2,000 meters, whatever it is, and then you go. At this point, you are now going to be descending, and you will keep descending up until you find the next source of lift. Um, by when you're out there thermaling, before you make your next move and leave, it is a good idea to look, and this is why that open brain is important. So you want to look around and say, oh, look, there's a farmhouse there. There's some other cliffs over there or some hills behind it. So that's the line I'm going to take. And then you take this line and you go looking. And you look over the first one and you check, is there something there? Nope. Go to the next one. Something there? Nope. Go to the following one. The most people do say that usually if you've got 3 triggers along your way, one of them is going to work. And we certainly hope so. Yeah, and these kind of stuff you can do on your research, you can do in flight as well. And this is part of the decision making, and it's part of the prediction, is looking at the terrain and evaluating it and flying a line that will help hopefully connect you with the next thermal. On that point, it is ideal if you think back to the section where we talked about thermal structure, the vertical structure, that at the bottom, the thermal is still forming and it's quite all over the place. Or perhaps it's bubble thermals where you have a thermal release and then it's heating up and then it releases and then it's heating up. The point I want to get to, that it's much easier to find a thermal with height. And this was a game changer for me as a junior pilot, because we typically start off and want to hold on to the mountain as if that's the only place where there's thermals. That is not true. There are thermals out in the flats. They could be triggering off the foothills and the farmhouses and so on. And if you are on the mountain and you're trying to find something, you want to give yourself a height where at this point, if you haven't found anything, you take your height and you fly out, thereby increasing. If you leave the mountain and you fly away from that slope over, for example, if I left the mountain at this point and let's say I'm at 600 meters above sea level here, but next to the mountain, I'm only 50 or 100 meters above ground level. If I fly out now over the fields over here, I am 500 meters above ground level. Now I've got much more altitude to find a thermal. So if it was a bubble thermal that was releasing off the farmhouse and coming, and I've got a greater chance of finding it, or even a column that was releasing over here, I've just left over here and I've got height, and by entering the thermal with height, it's much easier to core it and go up. So the mistake that people tend to do is to hang on to the mountain and you stay close to the slope and you're trying and you're trying and you're trying, and then you go down and you land. So leave there, give yourself a cutoff and leave such that you've got some altitude, which buys you time over this flatland area or over the foothills to get a decent thermal. And that's a fundamental point that really helped me. Don't hang on to the mountain. Go out there. You'll increase your chances of getting a thermal, because height is better at finding thermals.
Rio,
yes.
Just to play with what you're busy saying there. So you launch at the launch there that you're looking at Porterville, and you get up, what your house normal thing,
Mhm.
then you decide you're going to go north, right? So, because let's say use the same example that it's a southwesterly wind on the ground. So you identify those 3 trigger points that you've mentioned already, and you try first of all those foothills until say you 600 above or whatever, 500, whatever it might be. Now you decide to push out to those positions. Do you want to try and, as you say, be upwind of where the thermal might be rather than on the back end? So in other words, do you want to rather look around further west and then work your way back towards the ridge rather than going from behind the thermal and then working your way into the wind?
So I'm just gonna using my mouse over here to talk through your scenario. So we've launched at this point and we heading north. So this is the direction we're heading, in this direction over here. And we fly over the foothills and we don't have anything. And then the question is, do we fly out here to the dam or down here or some other trigger? The easiest thing, you want to cover as much ground as possible to get to your sources. If you are flying in this direction from here, going in this direction, you're flying into wind, and that's going to use up your altitude getting to this trigger over here. If you were at this point of year, then it's not such a big deal. You're just going a bit crosswind to try out there. And
sorry, is the wind southwest in this example, or is it north?
Southwest.
Okay, so if you're going north, then you're going with the wind, right?
Yes.
So then you would go to the closest trigger, which would be right underneath the launch area, basically. If you had to move your cursor down, the lowest trigger.
So if you went from here straight out there.
Yes. And then work your way north with the wind, because the wind's going to help you get there faster, right?
Well, if you think about it, if it's a southwester, so this is a southwester is coming from the bottom left-hand side. And if you fly straight west to get to this point, you're flying crosswind. And that's going to be flying slower than if you were to fly northwest, for instance. So if I took off from here in the southwester, you know, and looking and I'm trying to find something.
So technically the lowest trigger.
Yes.
Sorry, that lowest trigger, the one at the bottom of your screen, you probably wouldn't even get a chance to have a look at it really, because you're not going to fly back into wind to get to it, are you?
No, I wouldn't. Depending on where you are, if I left at this point and was heading north and in a southwester, it could trigger off here, and I will expect to find the thermal somewhere around this point because it will go downwind, it will drift downwind. So I will look that over here coming for that trigger. Also going over the foothills is giving me another potential trigger. This is not working, and now I'm getting lower, so I'm 400 meters above the landing field. I would take my height now from this point and then go just a little bit downwind of this farmhouse and this tree line over here to try and find the thermal that could trigger off this point here, whilst I still have altitude. But by moving downwind, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, you will cover more ground than if you were to, example, now fly in this direction into wind.
Sure.
And you know, because you've got limited altitude, you want to cover as much ground to get to your possible triggers to find that save that you're looking for. Any other questions? Nope. Cool. We'll keep moving.